Hey everyone, Spum Donor here. I have taken a break from editing the last video of my series about Disney to share some thoughts about the King of the Hill reboot, which just came out this week. I watched the first 2 episodes, and bottom line, they weren't terrible, but I don't feel compelled to keep watching. I don't think it justifies itself. The first episode is the more interesting one, obviously, because they're setting everything up, but I won't really have anything to say about the second one, because that felt like they were just doing a typical King of the Hill story, like they would have done back in the original series, which again is like, why do I need to see an inferior version of that? If you've watched the whole season and you liked it, or there's a standout episode worth seeing, let me know in the comments, but I'm not planning on seeing the rest of them, and by the way, releasing 10 episodes all at once, I know that's the standard for streaming, but it really reminds you how bad the streaming model of TV is for building a connection with the audience, especially for a family sitcom like King of the Hill, because part of the experience is you keep coming back every week after week, month after month, to spend time with these characters. It's like they're a family that you know, and you keep visiting them. They dump all the episodes at once so that people will binge them and get them trending, but the faster people watch a whole season of TV, the less it means to them afterwards. You need to make that investment of time to have an emotional investment. And I did want to like this. I was cautiously optimistic because of how much I enjoyed Hate Revisited, Peter Bagg's miniseries follow-up to his comic series Hate, which I made a video about. That was a case of a cartoonist not only coming back to his characters after a long time, but also letting them grow older and exploring what they were up to at later stages of their lives, and he did a great job with that. So I was hoping for something similar from Mike Judge, although, of course, it's more complicated with the realities of bringing back a TV show after more than a decade. Him bringing back Beavis and Butthead is one thing, but when you bring back cartoon characters and have them age, that's rare to see and probably even more rarely well done. And in the cases of Hate and King of the Hill, both of those, they made me feel like I had grown up alongside those characters. Like Buddy Bradley was kind of old enough to be my older brother when I read Hate, and Bobby Hill was pretty close to my age when King of the Hill started. And I should mention that I hate cartoon sitcoms. I think whatever's good about The Simpsons has not justified all the Simpsons and Family Guy clones that have followed. But that's a big topic for another time. As far as King of the Hill is concerned, I think King of the Hill is actually the only other good cartoon sitcom besides The Simpsons, but unlike The Simpsons, King of the Hill actually had the good taste to end after a decade. And incidentally, I think if The Simpsons had just decided to age up their characters at some point, like a soap opera does, let Bart and Lisa be teenagers, let Homer and Marge be elderly, that would have opened up a whole new bunch of stories that would have justified the series continuing. Because the fact that cartoon characters remain frozen in time and never age, that's not actually a problem unless you have a cartoon sitcom where so many of the stories are just based on things that happen to people in real life, based on whatever point they're at in life. So that's why The Simpsons just became totally absurd at some point. They had exhausted the story possibilities that were still grounded in reality. And again, that's why I was a little excited for King of the Hill, because Hate Revisited was a nice reminder that if you do let cartoon characters grow older, it can be exciting to see how that's changed them, and you can tell new stories. One thing that is weird about cartoon characters getting older, though, in a series like this reboot, is with child characters, they always get redesigned in such a way that they're supposed to be adults, but they still have to be recognizable to how they were drawn as kids, so the results are usually kind of uncanny. Because in real life, when you grow from a child to an adult, there is some core of you that remains the same visually, but there's a million subtle changes your face goes through. And in cartoons, those identifiable features are already really simplified, and they don't want the character to look too different. So what you tend to end up with these grown-up versions of cartoon kids are what looks like just the kids' heads on adult bodies, like Rugrats all grown up, or even in The Simpsons when they would do like episodes set in the future, it just sort of looked like Bart and Lisa's heads were on adult proportioned bodies. And that's what Bobby Hill looks like in this. It's just kind of weird in the first episode to see him hooking up with a girl because he still looks like his old junior high schooler self. And by the way, they tell you that 15 years have passed since the original series, but Bobby says he's 21. So he wasn't 6 years old in the original show. I hate to be a stickler for continuity, but that's kind of a glaring error. The aspect of this reboot I was kind of dreading was, like, King of the Hill had the good fortune to end before the 2010s, before every single movie or show was being turned into culture war fodder, but that didn't stop people from arguing online for years, for like really literally the past decade, about whether or not Hank Hill would vote for Trump or how he would feel about transgenderism. And I think it speaks well of the show that Hank Hill was such a three-dimensional character that people could even debate this, that they felt some kind of connection to him or felt that he had depth and wouldn't necessarily be predictable on those things. They could see him going either way. So when the reboot was announced, I had kind of a sinking feeling in my stomach, like, oh boy, now we're going to have an official record of what Hank Hill thinks about the modern world, or of what's changed in American life since the show went off the air, and that was in 2009. And obviously a lot has changed since then. And to be fair, I did have some anticipation about wanting to see what Hank Hill thought of the modern world, but that's only because Mike Judge is such a great social satirist, and he's never been interested in political satire per se most of the time, but his interest is people, like how they talk and how they behave, how they regard themselves, how they relate to others. There is so much humanity in his work, which I think is why King of the Hill is the only other good cartoon sitcom, even though, obviously my tastes are pretty cartoony and it's not cartoony at all. But it showed what a lot of real Americans and real American life was like that you didn't see in 99% of other sitcoms, animated or otherwise, especially since it was set in a small town in Texas. So that's why a lot of people felt attached to the show and the characters, because there was a real core of reality and a core of humanity to them. And part of what we liked about Hank Hill was his lack of pretension, his straightforwardness, and the way he could kind of cut through the smoke and the pretensions of other people and of modern society. So yeah, like, of course you want to see what he thinks of America today, more so than characters from other series that might get revived and set in the modern time, the modern era. Unfortunately, what they do on the King of the Hill reboot is a lot like what happens on other series that get rebooted. You see these old characters relating to new things, but you're very aware of the writers walking the line of not wanting to offend anyone. It's like safe satire. Like, Arlen has not really changed that much. Hank is just complaining about inconsequential things like poke restaurants. And some people make fun of this as like the characters get an iPhone cliche. Like, if you rebooted Popeye or something and made an episode about him using apps, that's obviously pretty hacky writing. And, the King of the Hill reboot isn't that bad, but there's sort of a sense of complacency. Like, America has obviously changed a lot since the show ended, but at the end of the first episode, they have this little bit where Hank is told that they've changed the name of Samoan Girl Scout cookies to be more respectful to Samoans, and he's okay with that. He says, that's a good change, and the Girl Scout goes, it's nice to be nice, and the guitar music in the background is pleasant, and it's like they're letting you know, they're assuring you that Hank is basically okay with the modern world, and whether you think that's true to the character or not is subjective, but I don't think it is. And there's another moment in the first episode, for example, where he sees the bathrooms are all gender at a restaurant, and his reaction is just sort of a non-reaction. It's just befuddlement. He asks Peggy, are we all gender? So it feels like they're pulling their punches on stuff like that. I don't think the old Hank would react quite so ambivalently, and the premise of the revival is that Hank and Peggy have been out of the country since 2009. So they have no idea how society's changed since then, and that's his reaction. Barely any reaction at all. It just feels like a compromise from the people running the show, because understandably, they wouldn't want their audience to think that every episode is just about it's going to be about Hank going off on or getting disgusted by something about modern society. So I don't blame them for that, but it is kind of trying to have it both ways, where you have this character who's sort of a stiff and a square, and it's fun to see him bounce off of other people who think they're really hip. But then you also don't want to alienate your audience too much, because that might sometimes include people who are watching Hulu. You know, you can have Hank making caustic remarks about his grill having Wi-Fi functionality, but they're not going to have him make caustic remarks about all-gender bathrooms. And that's too bad, because it's only sort of mildly amusing to see him complain about, ride-sharing apps. But like, what if there were an episode where he accidentally downloads Grindr? They don't want to go places like that. That might be too real. So the social satire is pretty restrained. There's moments of funny observational humor, like when he goes to Megalomart and the people working there are unhelpful. Like, that's some well-observed kind of humor, the way the employees are talking, but that's nothing that's going to blow your mind. Incidentally, if you do want your mind blown, Nathan Fielder did a series for Showtime a couple of years called The Curse, which kind of reminded me of King of the Hill because it was set in Arizona, and I thought it was, I know Arizona is not Texas, but it reminded me of like Mike Judge at his best, because it was some of the best social satire of the past 20 years I've seen, and it's a much darker show than King of the Hill ever was, but I would recommend investing your time in watching that instead of this. You watch the first couple of episodes of The Curse, I think you will be compelled to continue watching. That was a show that didn't pull any punches. Oh, and by the way, I did glance over the episode descriptions on Hulu for the rest of the series. Apparently in the third episode, I wish I'd had time to keep watching, but well, maybe I don't. I mean, maybe it's for the best. In the third episode, apparently Bobby gets in trouble for cultural appropriation. So first of all, what year is this? They're coming out in 2025 against people who complain about cultural appropriation. Yeah, that's not speaking up when it actually mattered. But the point is, this reboot, they recast the voice of Khan, Hank's neighbor, because he was voiced by a white guy. It used to be Toby Huss, who's still doing other voices on the show. So, spare me your tepid, overdue complaints about wokeness, King of the Hill reboot, because you're still bending over for it behind the scenes. One last noteworthy aspect of this reboot I wanted to talk about was that even before it premiered, as soon as clips started to be released, people online, animation fandom in general, a lot of people were complaining about the animation itself, and specifically they were complaining about the use of rigging, which the original series never used. If you're not familiar with the term rigging in animation, basically it's a feature of digital animation where a drawing or parts of a drawing can be saved and manipulated as assets. In other words, if you want a character to move their arm up, you wouldn't have to draw a bunch of new frames of animation of that arm moving upwards. You could just rig the arm to move up and down on an axis point, like the character's elbow. Obviously, this saves time and money, but if it's done too liberally or clumsily, it kind of makes everything look like South Park animation. Of course, a lot of animated shows don't care, and they've been doing that long enough that most people don't notice or think about it. But King of the Hill, they noticed when they added that to the reboot, because King of the Hill was never animated digitally. Some of the later seasons had digital color, but it was always a traditional cell animated show. So I thought it was pretty fascinating that even casual fans who don't necessarily think about animation production, they looked at those early clips and they felt like something's off with the animation. And I think they noticed because King of the Hill didn't have elaborate animation. It actually had very subtle animation acting where little movements and gestures and body language and expressions meant a lot. So when you see that more naturalistic animation relying on rigging, and you have a one-to-one comparison of how it used to look in the pre-digital era, you can see how much that human touch gets lost because of those digital shortcuts. So it's not something I think people notice with new shows, but they will notice when they see something pre-digital getting brought back in that way. So that about sums it up. Oh, by the way, the thumbnail for this video was made by a friend of mine who wished to go uncredited. He obviously watched the whole series and thought Bobby didn't come off well in it, so that was his idea. I didn't see those episodes. I just thought it was funny, so I used it. I hope it made you laugh too. Anyways, next week I'm doing another quick review of something that I've been looking forward to for a long time, Gennady Tartakovsky's Fixed, and after that will be the last part of my Disney series, How Disney Stole Your Childhood. So subscribe, like this video if you enjoyed it, and I will be back soon. Thanks for listening.